This is Reimagine Black Women in Britain, the inaugural exhibition of the Black Cultural Archives Heritage Centre. Welcome to the exhibition Reimagine Black Women in Britain. This exhibition was born out of an oral history project with women from the Black Women's Movement. Those women spoke about the struggles that they had in the 70s and the 80s in terms of housing and education and other social issues. But when we listened to their oral histories, they also referred to women that inspired them, women that came before them, like Amy Ashford Garvey and Mary Seacole. And we felt that we needed to broaden our exhibition in order to document the presence of Black women in Britain. And so we begin with the ivory bangle lady. Her remains were discovered in the 1900s, but it wasn't until the 1990s that we realised that she was a woman because of her bone structure. And we also realised that she was a woman of African and European descent. She was buried with riches, with ivory, gold bangles, with pottery. And so we know that she is a wealthy woman, a woman of status, living in Roman York. Dido Elizabeth Bell is well known now because of the film Belle, but she's an interesting woman because of the period in which she lived. It's believed that her mother was an enslaved woman, but her father was a British Navy captain. And she was sent to live with her uncle and cousin, as we see in the portrait, Lady Elizabeth Murray, in Kenwood House. She lived an interesting life. She was a wealthy woman, a gentlewoman, but we know from diary accounts that she wasn't always invited to certain dinner parties when there were particular guests coming around. And so we begin to see the complexity of British society and the varying roles and status of African people in Britain. We move over to Celia, which is a story less known. Celia's a runaway servant, and her advert is found in our antique newspapers. It describes her vividly, even saying that she's pretty fat. She's 25 years old when she runs away. And what the master of this servant has done is he's called for her to be returned. And so we have this call which goes out, and there's a reward of 2 guineas, and the person is asked to turn her in to Jamaica Coffee House. And so we begin to build up a picture of what it's like for African servants living here in London, but it also throws up many suggestions. It suggests that there are a community of people that are helping each other escape as servants. It also suggests that Celia is not alone, that there are a number of African women living in London at the time because of the great detail that this article goes into. In the case, we have 2 books. The first is the first edition of Mary Prince's account of her experience of enslavement. She told her story, and this was written down. And we also have Phyllis Wheatley, who was a very educated woman. These 2 books are the first books to be published in Britain by Black women. And they demonstrate that Black women are educated, but they also talk about the brutal nature of enslavement. And so they go a long way to helping the abolition movement, both here and in the United States. The portrait which we see before us is of Seaman William Brown. Puzzling because we can see that she's a woman, but she in fact disguised herself as a man to join the British Navy. And we have a few sentences written about her in the National Archives, which basically say that she was serving in the Navy and was expelled because she was found to be a woman. The photograph is one which Ajamu X has taken of Dorothea Smart, and she's embodied the person and the character of Seaman William Brown. Mary Seacole is now a popular figure and known to many of us in Britain. Her story is interesting because whilst she is well known now, for a long time her history was forgotten. In Jamaica it was well celebrated and remembered, but in Britain we lost this story for a time. Mary Seacole was very popular during her time when she was alive. There were celebrations in Kennington Park for her. And this scrapbook, which was created in Winchester Primary School, was a scrapbook celebrating heroes of the Crimean War, and she is the only woman of African descent included in it. Whilst there are a number of women who contributed to the Auxiliary Territorial Service during World War II, there were also a number of performers during the war. People like Adelaide Hall and Elizabeth Welch and Una Marson. Una Marson was in fact a journalist in her home country and in Britain. She broadcast on the BBC a special programme called Calling the West Indies, interviewed servicemen here in Britain and broadcast back to the Caribbean. She was very influential because of her work, not only amongst the community, but on a national basis. And we move to Claudia Jones, who is known by many people as being the mother of Notting Hill Carnival. She was originally from Trinidad and began a small indoor carnival in West London in order to celebrate the culture of the Caribbean, but also to bring communities together and create social harmony. She also was the publisher of the West Indian Gazette, which was right here in Station Road in Brixton. Amy Ashwood Garvey is often referred to as the first wife of Marcus Garvey, but she is also influential in her own right. Amy Ashwood Garvey travelled Europe, America and Africa, spoke about the need for greater unity, and also spoke about the need for women to be included in a movement to help the civil rights of Black people across the world. Not much is known about Stella Thomas. We do know that she was born in Nigeria and born to quite an affluent family. She attended Oxford University and she eventually went back to Nigeria to become the first female magistrate there. She's pictured here with Harold Moody, the founder of the League of Coloured People, and we know that she was a driving force in that organisation also. She is a call to us, the younger generation, to really dig and research in the archives, because not much else is known about her other than the information that we have here today. Connie Mark is a very popular figure. Many people recognise her because of her work in schools, but she also was part of the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which she joined in Jamaica when she was just 19. She also came over here to Britain during the time of World War II to help with those efforts. She's an inspiration not only because of her contribution to the Second World War, but because of her campaigning afterwards for better rights for ex-servicemen who were from the Caribbean. She also was very good at going into schools and talking to them about Black history and speaking in a way which they would have recognised from home. Here we have pictured Doris Morris. This is in fact her funeral programme. She was part of the Windrush generation, one of many women who came over to Britain after the Second World War to contribute to the workforce. She worked in a factory and was very influential and contributed to the trade union there. And we now know her daughter, Olive Morris, who also went on to protest and campaign for fairer rights. We have in the case a copy of Black Teacher, which was written by Beryl Gilroy. She was one of the first Black head teachers here in London, and she writes about her experience and her struggle within the education system. Her book was influential not only in inspiring other teachers, but in inspiring the Black community and ensuring that they were aware of how to help their children through the education system. Pictured here is Olive Morris. She's a very important woman to Brixton as well as the whole country. She was involved in the Black Panthers movement as well as the Brixton Women's Group, which she founded, and the Organisation of Women of African and Asian Descent. She was a real force for campaigning for social justice, against police brutality, and for fairer housing. We see her pictured here fighting against police brutality, and she is pictured with members of the Black Panther Party. She is an inspiration not only because of her campaigning works, but because she did it all within 27 years. She had a very short life and died at the tender age of 27, but achieved a lot whilst she was alive. We move to Jessica Handley, who is pictured here with Angela Davis at a conference. Jessica and her husband Eric Handley were very important to publishing, to black publishing in the community in Britain. They began publishing from their home books which were not previously available on British soil, and in that way they influenced the British community. They also started a number of black radical book fairs and were part of many protests and campaigns. Their influence and their legacy lives on. Within the London Metropolitan Archives, they have a collection and also a room named after them so that future generations can remember their legacy. In the 1970s, for the first time, local black women's groups came together from all across the country, and they formed a conference and eventually an organisation called the Organisation of Women of Asian and African Descent. You'll note that the Africa has been crossed out, and that is because when this organisation first formed, a lot of Asian women also came and said that they wanted to be part of this organisation because they were experiencing similar struggles with education, housing and employment. And so they were incorporated into the group. But as you can imagine, in 1970, it was expensive to reprint publications. And so we see across the posters, the membership cards, and all of their literature that Asian has been added in. The organisation lasted from 1979 to 83. It was a very short time, but the women and their work, which came out, was very significant to the education system and to the British society which we see today. Here we see footage of that first conference in 1979, which took place in what was then the Caribou Centre in Brixton, which is now on Gresham Road. Women are reading manifestos and speaking about the work of their local groups, as well as the struggles which they share and face. The exhibition culminates with Baroness Doreen Lawrence. She is symbolic because as a contemporary figure, she exemplifies the struggle which continues, the struggle for justice and equality in British society today. And she also hands over the baton to younger generations in order to continue that struggle, to ensure that black and white children grow up today in a society which is equal, fair and